She looked good on both ends, Coach Kara Lawson said after watching Caitlin Clark's first practice for the USA Basketball Senior Women's National Team. But that simple statement doesn't capture what really happened at Team USA camp. Clark didn't just look good, she completely outclassed every newcomer there, including Angel Reese.
What really happened during that Team USA practice wasn't just competition. It was tension boiling over in real time. One player walked onto the court calm, confident, and fully in control. The other came in with expectations, pressure, and something to prove.
Sue Bird, the managing director, couldn't hide her excitement watching Clark push tempo, hit knockdown threes, and create chemistry with Aaliyah Boston that screamed starting lineup. After an injury-plagued season, Clark just proved she's 100% healthy and ready to lead Team USA to gold in 2026. And Angel Reese? Well, let's just say she's been left in the dust.
By the end of the practice game, the gap between them was impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark didn't just outplay Angel Reese. She dictated the pace, controlled the moment, and quietly exposed who was ready for the spotlight and who wasn't. And when the runs ended, the body language told a story the box score never could.
This Team USA team, Caitlin Clark destroys in day 2 of Team USA camp, looking like the best player in the world as usual.
What started as a routine Team USA practice quickly shifted into something heavier. This wasn't a casual run or a low-intensity tune-up. From the opening possessions, the energy on the court felt sharp, almost confrontational. Every cut mattered. Every defensive switch was loud. Everyone knew eyes were watching, not just coaches, but teammates, silently measuring where they stood. Caitlin Clark settled in almost immediately. No forcing shots. No trying to make a point. She played like someone who already understood the room.
Just really thankful for, the training staff and player development and everybody that has kind of been there with me. They haven't taken a break either because they invest a lot of time and they want me to be successful. So I think for myself, it's not proving it to yourself again, but it's just that feeling. And I think it just made me smile quite a bit. I really did kind of feel like myself out there and just continuing to get my lungs back. But I felt like I was moving really well. So it was pretty satisfying.
She pushed the tempo on rebounds, dragged defenders out beyond their comfort zone, and made quick reads that put pressure on everyone guarding her. The game flowed through her without her demanding it. That alone changed the balance of the floor.
Clark declared herself 100% healthy and then proved it on the court. Her shots fell. Her passes found their targets. Her court vision looked sharper than ever. She pushed tempo like the Clark of old, creating fast break opportunities and finding teammates in perfect positions. The woman who averaged 16.5 points and 8.8 assists in those 13 healthy games looked completely locked in.
Angel Reese came out aggressive, physical, and emotional. You could see how badly she wanted to assert herself early. She fought for position, talked through plays, and tried to impose her presence. But as the possessions stacked up, the contrast became obvious. Clark was controlling outcomes. Reese was reacting to them.
Angel Reese made it clear how much making the team meant to everyone there. Everybody wants to make the team. It's an honor to be even in this camp. They didn't just select us for no reason. They handpicked us because they thought we would bring something to the table, she said. The pressure was real. Each player knew their spot wasn't guaranteed. Clark understood the stakes perfectly. You all want to win, you're all fighting for a spot, she admitted. But her approach on day 2 made that fight look one-sided.
The moment that shifted the tone came midway through the scrimmage. Clark hit a deep 3 in transition, then followed it up by threading a pass through traffic that led to an easy bucket. 2 possessions. To clean reads, no celebration, just execution. On the other end, Reese missed an opportunity, then showed visible frustration when the next play didn't come her way.
Angel Reese emphasized that players were selected for camp based on their ability to contribute to the team. But Reese's fit with the new direction looked questionable. Her playing style didn't mesh well with Clark's tempo-focused approach. The coaching staff seemed less impressed with Reese's individual performances compared to Clark's team-first mentality. Reese grew frustrated watching Clark dominate practices while her own opportunities decreased. The competitive atmosphere intensified as roster spots became more defined.
Hands went up. Words were exchanged. The body language tightened. That's when the sideline noticed. Coaches don't just watch makes and misses. They watch response. Clark stayed composed, directing teammates, calling out spacing, moving into the next play without hesitation. Reese looked rattled. The frustration lingered longer than the possession itself. From there, the practice stopped feeling even. Clark dictated the pace, forcing everyone else to adjust to her rhythm.
Clark took the opposite approach. She made everyone around her look better. When teammates made good cuts, Clark rewarded them with perfect passes. When they set solid screens, Clark found ways to get them involved in the offense. Her team-first mentality stood out in a setting where most players needed to prove themselves. Clark's leadership qualities emerged naturally during practice sessions. She communicated constantly with teammates, calling out screens and directing traffic. Players started following her lead on tempo changes and defensive rotations.
Reese kept pressing, trying to swing momentum back, but the more she pushed, the more the gap showed. One player was playing the game. The other was fighting the moment. And by the end of that run, it was clear this practice had quietly drawn a line between control and chaos.
Clark's chemistry with players like Aaliyah Boston and Cameron Brink highlighted natural connections that Reese couldn't replicate. Her chances of making the final roster appeared to be slipping away. Coach Kara Lawson was impressed with Clark's performance at camp. She looked good on both ends of the court and hadn't missed a beat, Lawson noted. The head coach highlighted Clark's focus and readiness despite time away from competitive play. These comments signaled Clark's locked-in status for the 2026 World Cup roster.
As the practice game continued, the difference between confidence and frustration became impossible to hide. Caitlin Clark wasn't getting louder. She wasn't demanding the ball. She didn't need to. Every possession seemed to bend in her direction naturally. Teammates spaced better when she handled it. Cuts came sharper. The floor felt wider the moment she crossed. Half-court. Clark kept doing the little things that don't show up in highlight reels but decide everything. She slowed the game when it needed calm. She sped it up the instant she sensed hesitation. One possession, she pulled a defender just far enough to open a driving lane. The next, she drew two defenders and fired a pass before the help even committed. It wasn't flashy. It was suffocating for anyone trying to match her impact. Angel Reese, meanwhile, looked increasingly tense. Each time Clark controlled another sequence, Reese's urgency rose. You could see it in how she attacked rebounds, how quickly she tried to force the next play, how often she looked toward the sideline for validation. The emotional weight started stacking. Missed opportunities didn't reset. They lingered. There was a sequence late in the run that captured everything. Clark pushed the tempo after a defensive stop, forced a scramble, and found an open teammate for a clean finish. No reaction, no gesture, just back on defense. On the very next possession, Reese tried to create through contact, didn't get the call she expected, and immediately showed visible frustration. The contrast was sharp. One player absorbed the moment, the other fought it. That's when the whispers started on the bench. Not about points or stats, but about composure. Coaches watch who stabilizes a group under pressure. Clark was doing that effortlessly. Reese was wearing every possession emotionally, and it began to show in her timing and decision-making. By the end of the practice game, the outcome wasn't about who scored more. It was about who looked in command when things got uncomfortable. Clark looked steady, almost detached, like the moment was smaller than her. Reese looked overwhelmed by the weight of it, and once that dynamic set in, it didn't reset, it hardened. By the time the next run started, the dynamic on the court had shifted again. This was no longer about individual reps or working through sets. Players were subconsciously choosing who they trusted to lead the possession, and that choice showed up in the smallest details. Who they looked at after grabbing a rebound, who they ran toward in transition, who they expected to make the right decision when the play broke down. Caitlin Clark became that center of gravity without ever calling for it. Teammates drifted into cleaner spacing when she had the ball. Bigs ran harder knowing the pass would arrive on time. Shooters held their spots because they trusted the read. The game simplified around her. That's what real control looks like. Not volume, clarity. Angel Reese, on the other hand, started pressing against that flow. You could see her trying to inject herself into sequences that were already moving. She fought for touches instead of letting them come. When plays didn't swing her way, the frustration showed immediately. A quick glance, a sharp reaction, a visible sigh. None of it went unnoticed. There was a stretch where Clark barely shot at all, yet the offense looked smoother than at any point earlier. She manipulated defenders with her eyes, pulled help just enough to open lanes, and let teammates finish the work. That stretch quietly did more damage than any deep three. It showed who could run a system and who needed the system to run through them. On the bench, body language told the rest of the story. Coaches leaned forward during Clark's possessions. Conversations paused. Notes were taken. When Reese struggled through a sequence, the response felt different, less urgency, less adjustment, almost like decisions were already forming. The emotional contrast kept widening. Clark stayed even. Reese grew louder, more reactive, more visibly upset when things didn't bend her way. In a setting where composure is currency, that matters. International play doesn't reward emotion, it punishes it. By the end of that segment, the practice no longer felt competitive in the way people expected. It felt decided, not because of dominance, but because one player made the environment easier for everyone else, while another made it heavier. And once teammates sense that difference, they don't forget it. At some point, frustration stops living inside a player's head and starts leaking into the room. That's when it becomes a problem. During the later stretch of the practice game, that line was crossed. The intensity didn't drop, but the patience did, and the contrast between composure and emotion became even sharper. Caitlin Clark continued doing what she had done all session. She adjusted. When defenders pressed higher, she slipped passes behind them. When they sagged, she pulled up without hesitation. When the pace needed calming, she slowed the possession and reset everyone's spacing with a simple gesture. She wasn't reacting to pressure, she was creating it. Angel Reese, meanwhile, looked visibly irritated as touches became less frequent and plays flowed away from her. The reactions were subtle at first. A delayed jog back, a look toward the sideline, a frustrated clap after a missed opportunity. But in a gym full of elite players and coaches trained to read behavior, nothing goes unnoticed. There was one sequence that seemed to freeze the room. Clark initiated the action, drew two defenders, and kicked the ball out for an open look. The shot fell. On the other end, Reese tried to force a play through traffic, didn't get the result she wanted, and immediately showed frustration. The possession ended, but the emotion didn't. That lingered longer than the miss itself. Coaches don't penalize mistakes. They expect them. What they watch is response. Clark's response was always neutral. Reese's response was emotional. In international competition, where whistles are tighter and pressure is constant, that difference matters more than raw production. As the run wrapped up, the energy around Reese felt tense. Teammates didn't disengage, but they didn't adjust around her either. With Clark, the opposite happened. Players synced up naturally. Screens were set cleaner. Cuts were sharper. Everyone seemed to know where to be. That's the unspoken reality of high-level camps. It's not about tantrums or outbursts. It's about who steadies the room when things get uncomfortable. And by that point in practice, it was clear which presence made the environment feel controlled and which one made it feel heavier. By the time the final stretch of the practice wrapped up, the outcome wasn't being measured in points or stops anymore. It was being measured in trust. These camps move fast, and decisions form quicker than most fans realize. Coaches aren't waiting for games months down the line to understand who fits. They're watching how players handle moments exactly like this. Caitlin Clark had already answered every question without saying a word. She showed she could control tempo, elevate teammates, and stay composed even when the pressure quietly intensified. She didn't chase dominance. It followed her. That's the type of presence Team USA values more than any stat line. Angel Reese, on the other hand, found herself fighting uphill against momentum that never swung back her way. The frustration wasn't about effort or desire. It was about fit. When the game demanded calm, she brought urgency. When it required patience, she pressed. None of it came from a lack of talent. It came from the inability to reset emotionally once the tone shifted. That's what made this practice so telling. No one got cut on the spot. No announcement was made. But rooms like this remember everything. Coaches remember who stabilized runs and who escalated tension. Teammates remember who made the game feel simpler and who made it feel heavier. Those impressions don't fade by the next camp. Clark walked off the floor looking exactly the same as when she stepped on. Focused, even confident. Reese looked drained. Not physically, but emotionally. And that difference matters more than most fans want to admit. International basketball isn't forgiving. There's no room for emotional swings or visible frustration when possessions get tight. This wasn't about embarrassment or one player being smoked for clicks. It was about control versus reaction, leadership versus resistance. By the end of the practice, one player had quietly strengthened her case as the engine of the team. The other left with more questions than answers. And once those questions start forming at this level, they don't disappear. They follow you into every evaluation, every lineup decision, and every conversation behind closed doors. What made this practice linger wasn't anything dramatic that showed up on social media. It was the quiet realization spreading through the gym that the hierarchy had already started forming. Not on paper, not officially, but emotionally and tactically. And once that happens, it's almost impossible to reverse. Caitlin Clark had reached that rare space where the game slowed down for her while speeding up for everyone else. She wasn't reacting to what Angel Reese or anyone else was doing. She was operating on a different layer entirely. Reads came before defenders committed. Passes arrived before teammates even asked for them. That kind of control creates comfort, and comfort is contagious. Angel Reese, meanwhile, looked increasingly boxed in by the moment. Every possession felt heavier than the last. When she did make a play, it felt like relief instead of momentum. When she didn't, the frustration resurfaced immediately. At this level, coaches see that as emotional leakage. And emotional leakage is something international teams avoid at all costs. There's an unspoken rule in elite camps. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to be dependable. Clark checked that box on every run. Even when she wasn't scoring, she was organizing. Even when she wasn't touching the ball, she was influencing where everyone else went. Reese struggled to find that same footing once the offense stopped flowing through her. What made it worse was how natural Clark's leadership looked. She didn't force it. She didn't demand attention. Teammates simply gravitated toward her. That's the difference between being a focal point and being the foundation. One requires constant energy. The other stabilizes everything around it. By the end of the session, the contrast felt uncomfortable because it was undeniable. This wasn't about talent gaps or effort levels. It was about emotional control under scrutiny. One player absorbed the pressure and turned it into rhythm. The other wore it possession by possession. And in a gym where futures are quietly decided long before rosters are announced, that difference carries weight. The kind that doesn't show up on stat sheets, but absolutely shows up when names are written down behind closed doors. By the time players started filtering off the court, the conversation had already changed. Not out loud, not publicly, but in the way coaches spoke to certain players. In the way teammates clustered around specific voices, in the way future lineups quietly started making sense. One practice had done what months of debate couldn't. Caitlin Clark didn't need a dominant scoring run to make her case. She had already won the most important battle. When spacing got tight, players adjusted around her. When the energy wavered, she steadied it. That's not coincidence. That's leadership showing itself under pressure. Angel Reese walked off with a different weight. Not failure, but friction. The type that lingers when expectations collide with reality. She wasn't dismissed or written off, but the role question became unavoidable. Could she adapt when the game wasn't centered on her? Could she stay composed when momentum didn't swing her way? Those questions don't get answered with effort alone. The hardest part about moments like this is that they don't announce themselves. There's no buzzer beater, no headline moment. Just a slow realization that one player fits the direction of the team more cleanly than another. And once that realization takes hold, everything else follows. Clark looked like the future because she made everyone else better without asking for credit. Reese looked stuck between who she's been asked to be and who the moment demanded she become. That disconnect matters at this level. International teams don't have time to manage emotions. They build around stability. This practice didn't end anyone's career, but it absolutely shifted leverage. It reframed narratives. It clarified who the system bends toward and who has to bend to the system. That's why it mattered. That's why people inside the gym won't forget it. When the next roster decisions come down, this practice will be referenced quietly, not as a tantrum, not as a meltdown, but as the moment control and composure separated themselves from urgency and frustration. And in elite basketball, that separation usually decides everything. The real impact of that practice won't show up immediately. It won't be captured in a highlight reel or summed up in a post-game quote. Its weight comes later, in the decisions that feel obvious long after they were quietly made. Moments like this don't end debates. They settle them. Caitlin Clark left the court with momentum that didn't rely on hype. It was built on control, clarity, and consistency. She showed that even when emotions run high and expectations press in, she remains steady. That steadiness is exactly what international programs prioritize when margins are thin and pressure never lets up. Coaches don't have to manage her, they can trust her. Angel Reese's situation is more complicated. The frustration people noticed wasn't about effort or competitiveness. It came from collision. A player used to imposing herself ran into a system that didn't need force. It needed balance. That's a hard adjustment, especially when the spotlight is bright and comparisons are unavoidable. Going forward, this practice becomes a reference point, not publicly, but internally. When discussions happen about rotations, roles, and lineups, coaches remember who simplified the game and who made it feel heavier. Teammates remember who helped them play freely and who seemed weighed down by the moment. Those memories shape trust, and trust shapes opportunity. This doesn't mean Reese is finished or written off, but it does mean the margin for adjustment just got thinner. At this level, adaptability matters as much as talent. Emotional control matters as much as production. The ability to fit within a system matters more than the need to stand out, Clark showed. She can be the engine without forcing the issue. Reese showed she still needs the game to meet her halfway. That difference defines trajectories more often than fans want to admit. When future camps roll around and roles become more defined, this practice will still echo quietly in the background, not as controversy, but as clarity. One player moved closer to becoming the center of the program. The other now faces a choice: adapt to the flow or continue fighting it. What unfolded during that practice wasn't about ego or embarrassment. It was about control under pressure. Caitlin Clark showed she can command a room without forcing a moment, letting the game bend naturally around her. Angel Reese ran into a different reality, one where emotion and urgency don't always translate to impact. At this level, that distinction matters. Coaches remember who steadies chaos and who reacts to it. This wasn't the end of anyone's story, but it was a turning point. Because once a program identifies its center of gravity, everything else starts falling into place.